I'm not leaving her out there to die. Emma's voice cracked as she shoved past the teacher's arm, snow already bearing her boots to the ankle. Someone has to go, and none of you will. So I will. Behind her, the wind screamed like something alive swallowing the mountain whole. Somewhere in that white nothing, a biker's daughter was freezing to death, and nobody believed a farm girl could bring her home. Before you find out what happened next, subscribe to the channel. Follow this story all the way to the end and comment the city you're watching from. I read every single one, and I want to see how far this story travels. Emma Carter had learned a long time ago that being underestimated wasn't the worst thing that could happen to a person. Being invisible was worse. And for 20 years in the small mountain town of Cedar Hollow, Montana, Emma had been exactly that, invisible. She woke before the sun most mornings, not because she wanted to, but because the animals didn't care whether she was tired. The chickens needed feed. The 2 remaining cows needed milking. The fences her father had built 30 years ago needed constant patching because the wood was old and the winters were cruel. By the time other 20-year-olds in town were still asleep in warm beds, Emma had already broken ice off the water trough with her bare hands. Her father, Walter Carter, was a good man who had been broken slowly by bad luck. A bank loan he couldn't climb out of. A wife who had passed 4 years earlier from an illness that ate through their savings before it ate through her body. A daughter who had given up her own future to keep the last piece of land the family owned from slipping away. You should have gone to that community college in Bozeman. Walter told her one night the same argument he brought up every few months, guilt sitting heavy in his voice. You had the grades, Em. You had the chance. And who would have fed the cows? Emma answered, not looking up from the boot. She was resoling with a needle and thread because a new pair cost money they didn't have. I'm not going anywhere, Dad. This is home. Walter didn't answer. He just looked at his daughter. Worn jacket, calloused hands, quiet strength in her eyes, and felt something between pride and heartbreak. In town, people had opinions about Emma Carter, and none of them mattered much to her anymore. The Carter girl, the one who still drove that 15-year-old truck with the dent in the door. The one who wore the same 3 jackets on rotation because that's all she had. People smiled at her out of politeness and forgot about her the moment she walked away. She wasn't rich. She wasn't popular. She had learned not to expect either. 17-year-old Haley Walker existed in the opposite kind of invisibility. Everyone in Cedar Hollow knew exactly who she was or thought they did. She was Grizz Walker's daughter, the president of the local Hells Angels chapter, a man whose name alone made shop owners nervous and made mothers pull their children a little closer on the sidewalk. Haley rode on the back of her father's motorcycle to school some mornings, and by lunchtime the whispers had already started. That's the biker's kid. I heard her dad broke a guy's arm outside the roadhouse. Wouldn't want to get on her bad side. Nobody asked Haley what she actually loved. Nobody knew she spent her weekends at her grandfather's ranch, brushing down the old mare named Dusty for hours, because the rhythmic motion made the noise in her head go quiet. Nobody knew she filled 3 sketchbooks a year with drawings of mountains and horses and things nobody else bothered noticing. Nobody knew that behind her father's leather vest and his reputation, there was a little girl who used to fall asleep on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, terrified of losing the only parent she had left. Grizz Walker had built walls around his daughter the way he built everything else in his life, thick, permanent, and impossible for outsiders to see past. What people mistook for coldness in him was actually devastation he had never let himself finish grieving. Haley's mother had died when she was 6, a car accident on an icy road not unlike the ones that wound through these very mountains. Grizz had never remarried, never really recovered. He simply channeled every ounce of love he had left into keeping the one person he had left alive and safe. You don't go anywhere without telling me, he reminded her constantly. You don't trust strangers. You keep your phone charged. I know, Dad, Haley would say, rolling her eyes the way teenagers do, not understanding yet that his rules weren't control. They were fear wearing a disguise. So when the annual winter school trip came up, a supervised hike, an overnight camp near Blackfoot Ridge, organized by Cedar Hollow High for the junior and senior classes, Grizz almost said no. It's run by the school, Dad. Mr. Reyes has done this trip for 8 years. Nothing's ever happened. Grizz stared at his daughter for a long moment, the same look he always gave her when he was fighting his instincts. Finally, he exhaled. Fine, but you check in every 4 hours. And if the weather turns even a little, you call me. I don't care what anyone says. I promise. He hadn't hugged her often since she'd become a teenager, worried it would embarrass her. But that morning before she climbed onto the school bus, he pulled her into his arms and held on a second longer than usual. Love you, kid. Love you too, Dad. It's one weekend. I'll be fine. Neither of them knew how wrong that sentence would turn out to be. Emma hadn't planned on going on the trip at all. Money was tight, and the trip fee, even discounted, was more than she wanted to ask her father for. But her guidance counselor, Mrs. Kellerman, had quietly covered her fee without telling anyone, muttering something about, "Every kid deserves one trip that isn't about work." Emma had almost refused out of pride, but something, maybe exhaustion, maybe a small, buried hope that she still deserved something for herself, made her say yes. She sat near the bottom of the bus alone, her backpack containing a compass her grandfather had given her before he passed a length of paracord waterproof matches and a thermal blanket the size of a folded napkin. Farm habits died hard. She never left home without being prepared for the worst, even for a weekend trip. Across the aisle, several rows up, Haley sat by the window, sketchbook in her lap, headphones half in. A group of girls a few seats ahead whispered just loud enough to be heard, "Do you think she has, like, biker gang stuff at her house? I heard her dad keeps guns in the garage. I wouldn't want to be alone with her." Haley's pencil paused over the page. She didn't turn around. She'd heard versions of this 100 times before. She just pressed the pencil harder into the paper and kept drawing. Emma noticed. She didn't say anything that wasn't her way, but she noticed the way Haley's shoulders tightened, the way she made herself smaller in her seat, like she was trying to disappear. Emma understood that posture. She'd worn it herself more times than she could count. The bus wound higher into the mountains forest, thickening on either side, the sky above shifting from pale blue to a heavier grayer color that Emma didn't like the look of. She'd grown up watching Montana skies her whole life. She knew what that color meant. "Storm's coming," she murmured to no one in particular. The trip leader, Mr. Reyes, had checked the forecast that morning. Clear skies, light snow possible in the evening, nothing severe. What none of them knew was that a secondary system, faster and far more violent than predicted, was barreling down from the north, and it was going to collide with the mountain range within hours. By early afternoon, the group had set up camp near Blackfoot Ridge, tents pitched in a loose circle, a fire crackling in the center. The mood was light. Some kids threw snowballs. Others took photos for social media. Haley sat slightly apart from the group, sketching the tree line, and Emma found herself, almost without deciding to, sitting a few feet away, doing the same, not drawing, just watching the mountains, the way she always did, reading them like her father read weather reports. "You always this quiet?" Haley asked without looking up, testing the water. Emma glanced over, surprised anyone had spoken to her first. "Guess so. You always draw like that fast, I mean." Haley shrugged. "It's easier than talking to people. People already decided who I am before I open my mouth." "Yeah," Emma said quietly. "I know that feeling." For a moment, something passed between them. Recognition, maybe two strangers realizing they were carrying the same invisible weight, just wrapped in different packaging. Neither of them knew yet how important that small connection would become. The wind picked up around 3 in the afternoon. Not dramatically at first, just a shift, a coldness that cut sharper than before. Mr. Reyes checked his radio, frowning at the static. By 4, snow had begun to fall, light and almost pretty, the kind that made postcards. By 4:30, it wasn't pretty anymore. The wind howled through the trees, snow turning sideways, visibility dropping fast. "Everyone into the main tent now," Mr. Reyes shouted, his voice barely cutting through the wind. "This isn't what was forecasted. We need to get everyone secure and radio for an early pickup." Chaos erupted in slow motion, the way it always does. Kids grabbing bags, tents flapping violently. Someone crying, someone else laughing, nervously, like this was still an adventure instead of a warning. Emma grabbed her pack immediately, years of farm instinct kicking in, helping stake down a collapsing tent before it could blow away entirely. "Where's Haley?" one of the chaperones called out, doing a head count against her clipboard. "I've got 16. We should have 17. The wind screamed louder, as if the mountain itself was answering the question. "Haley," Mr. Reyes shouted into the storm, cupping his hands around his mouth. "Haley Walker." No answer came back except the wind. Panic spread through the group like fire through dry grass. Someone remembered seeing her walk toward the tree line to get a signal for her phone, wanting to check in with her father like she'd promised. That had been almost 20 minutes ago. 20 minutes in a storm that had gone from light snow to a full whiteout in under half an hour. "We have to find her." one girl cried. We can't see 3 feet in front of us. A chaperone snapped back, fear bleeding into his voice. If we send people out there, we're going to lose more than one person. So what, we just leave her out there? Mr. Reyes tried the radio again. Static. He tried his phone, no signal. The temperature had dropped so fast that ice was already forming on the tent poles. We wait for a break in the storm, he said finally, though his voice shook with the words. We call for search and rescue the second we get a signal. Everyone stays together, nobody else goes out there. Emma stood at the edge of the tent watching snow swallow the world beyond the flap and felt something twist violently in her chest. She thought of the way Haley's shoulders had curled inward on the bus, the way she'd said people already decided who she is before she opens her mouth. A girl who spent her whole life being seen as a threat instead of a person who could be in danger. Somewhere out there, in temperatures already plummeting below freezing with wind that could strip warmth from a body in minutes, a 17-year-old girl was alone. And every adult in that tent had just decided the smartest thing to do was wait. Emma's hands curled into fists at her sides. She thought about her father's voice. The storms don't care about money or reputation, only about whether you're prepared, and she thought about Haley's eyes on the bus, small and guarded and lonely in a crowd that had already judged her. Nobody should be left out there to die, because everyone assumed someone else would go. I'm going after her, Emma said. The words landed in the tent like a dropped stone. Absolutely not, Mr. Reyes said, immediately turning toward her. Emma, I understand the instinct, but that storm will kill you in 20 minutes. We wait for rescue teams who are trained for rescue teams that can't even get up the mountain roads right now. Emma cut in, surprising herself with the steadiness in her own voice. You said it yourself, no signal, no radio. How long before someone with a truck and a plow even gets close to this ridge? An hour, 2. She doesn't have 2 hours out there, not in this. And you think you do, one of the chaperones snapped. You're not a rescue worker, Emma. You're a... He stopped himself, but everyone in the tent heard the word he swallowed. Farm girl. Nobody. Not qualified. Emma didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. I grew up in weather like this, she said, quiet but unshakable. I know how to read a compass without a screen. I know how to build a shelter out of nothing. I know what frostbite looks like before it turns dangerous. And I know this mountain range better than any GPS app you've got, because I've hiked it with my father since I was 7 years old, hunting elk in November storms twice this bad. She grabbed her pack, checking the compass, the paracord, the thermal blanket, moving with a calm precision that silenced the tent. I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you, I'm going because somebody has to, and none of you are going to. Emma, this is insane, Mr. Reyes said, stepping toward her. If something happens to you out there, then at least I tried, Emma said. And for the first time in her life, her voice didn't shake with self-doubt. It came out solid, certain, carved from 20 years of being told she wasn't enough, and finally deciding she didn't care what anyone thought anymore. You can call the school, call my dad, call whoever you need to call. But I'm not standing in this tent listening to the wind while a 17-year-old girl freezes to death because everyone's too scared to move. She pushed through the tent flap before anyone could physically stop her. The storm hit her like a wall. Wind tore at her jacket immediately, snow driving sideways into her face so hard it stung like sand. Visibility dropped to almost nothing beyond a few feet. For one terrifying second, Emma's own resolve wavered. The mountain didn't care how brave she was, didn't care how many storms she'd survived before. It could kill her just as easily as it could kill Haley. But then she thought about her mother in the final months of her illness, telling Emma from a hospital bed, "The world doesn't remember who was careful, sweetheart. It remembers who showed up." Emma pulled her hood tighter, gripped the compass in her frozen fingers, and walked directly into the white nothing where Haley Walker had vanished. Behind her in the tent, Mr. Reyes stood frozen for a moment, torn between chasing her down and protecting the 16 students still huddled together. Finally, he grabbed the radio again, hands shaking, and began trying every frequency he could reach, praying that somewhere beyond the static, someone was listening. He had no way of knowing that 30 miles away, in a garage full of motorcycles and grease-stained tools, a phone was about to ring, and the man who answered it would tear the entire mountain apart to get his daughter back. Emma pushed forward, one careful step after another, using the compass to keep her bearing steady, even as the wind tried to disorient her at every turn. The cold bit through her jacket almost immediately, working its way into her bones. But she forced herself to keep moving, scanning the ground for any sign, footprints, broken branches, anything that might tell her which direction Haley had gone before the storm erased every trace of her. She found a partial boot print near a cluster of pines already half filled with snow, and something in her chest tightened with urgent hope. "Haley," she screamed into the wind, her voice swallowed almost instantly. "Haley, can you hear me?" No answer, only the storm howling louder as if daring her to turn back. Emma didn't turn back. She kept walking, following the faint impression of footprints that grew fainter with every passing minute, snow filling them in almost as fast as she could find them, racing against a mountain that showed no mercy and a clock that was quickly running out of time. Somewhere ahead of her, buried in the whiteout, a girl who had spent her whole life being misunderstood was fighting to stay conscious in temperatures that were dropping toward deadly, and she had no idea that the only person willing to come looking for her was a farm girl the whole town had overlooked her entire life. Emma pressed forward into the storm, jaw clenched and heart pounding, refusing to let the wind win. She had no idea that this single decision to walk into a blizzard when everyone else stood still was about to collide her world with a family of bikers who would tear apart the mountains themselves to save the girl she was risking everything to find. And somewhere far below, a phone was already ringing in Grizz Walker's garage. The phone rang 3 times before Grizz Walker picked it up, grease still on his hands from the engine he'd been rebuilding all afternoon. "Reyes, why are you calling me and not the school line?" Grizz listened to me carefully. Mr. Reyes's voice was shaking so badly the words barely held together. "We've got a situation. The storm came in faster than forecasted. Haley went to get a signal on her phone, and she hasn't come back. It's been almost 30 minutes. Grizz went still. The wrench in his hand hit the concrete floor with a clatter he didn't even hear. "Say that again." "She's missing, Grizz, in the storm. We've got a search radius, but visibility is..." "Have you gone after her?" Silence on the line. "Have you gone after my daughter?" The wind chill is deadly. "Grizz, if we send more people out there, we could lose them too. We're waiting for a break to call." "You're waiting." Grizz's voice tore through the garage, echoing off the metal walls loud enough that 2 men working on a bike near the back door dropped their tools and turned. "My 17-year-old is out there freezing to death, and you're standing in a tent doing nothing." "One of the students already went after her," Reyes said quickly, desperate to say something that wasn't damning. "A girl named Emma. She wouldn't listen when I told her not to. She just..." "One kid went out there alone." Grizz's stomach dropped through the floor. "You let a kid go out into a blizzard after another kid, and none of the adults went with her. We couldn't stop her. She was already gone before." Grizz didn't hear the rest. He was already moving, phone wedged between his shoulder and his ear, grabbing his keys off the wall hook, with hands that had gone ice cold despite the warmth of the garage. "Give me coordinates. Every road marker, every trail, sign, anything. I'm coming up there right now." "Grizz, the roads are already closing and the county's issued a..." "I don't care what the county issued." His voice dropped into something low and dangerous, something the men in the garage had only heard a handful of times in the years they'd ridden with him. "That's my little girl out there. Roads don't stop me. Nothing stops me." He hung up before Reyes could argue further, already dialing the next number. Tank picked up on the first ring. "Prez, what's up?" "Emergency call. Everyone, now. Haley's missing on Blackfoot Ridge. Storm's got the whole mountain locked down, and the school's just standing around with their thumbs up their asses waiting for it to pass." There was a beat of silence on the other end, the kind of silence that meant a man was already reaching for his boots. "How many trucks we taken?" "All of them. Every plow attachment we've got, every winch, every set of chains. Call Preacher, call Doc, call anybody with 4-wheel drive and a set of balls big enough to drive into a whiteout. We leave in 15 minutes. "You got it, Prez. We'll find her." Grizz ended the call and stood alone in the garage for exactly 3 seconds, chest heaving, hands shaking. Not from fear for himself, but from a terror so absolute it felt like his ribs were caving in around his heart. He thought of Haley's face that morning, the way she'd rolled her eyes at his warnings, the way he'd hugged her a second too long because some part of him had known. "I promise," she'd told him. "I'll be fine." "You'd better be," he whispered to the empty garage. "You'd better be, baby girl." Then he grabbed his jacket and ran. High on the mountain, Emma had lost feeling in her fingertips almost 20 minutes ago. She kept moving anyway because stopping meant dying, and dying meant Haley stayed lost, and something in Emma refused to accept either outcome. The wind had picked up, even further screaming through the pines, with a violence that made her wonder for the first time if she'd made a fatal mistake. Haley, she screamed again, her voice raw, now barely audible even to herself over the storm. Haley, answer me! Nothing. She checked the compass with fingers that no longer bent properly, forcing herself to read the needle through eyes that were watering and half frozen. North-northeast. She was still tracking in the direction the footprints had led before the snow swallowed them completely. Her boot caught on something buried beneath the snow, and she went down hard, palms slamming into the ice pane, shooting up both wrists. For a moment, she just lay there, breath tearing out of her in ragged clouds, every muscle screaming at her to stop, to turn back, to admit this was impossible. Get up, she whispered to herself, her mother's voice echoing somewhere behind her own. Get up, Emma. She's out here somewhere. Get up. She pushed herself back to her feet, legs shaking, and kept walking. 10 more minutes. 15. The world had narrowed down to nothing but white and cold, and the sound of her own labored breathing. She was beginning to lose track of time, beginning to lose feeling in places she needed to keep feeling if she wanted to stay alive when she saw it. A shape, dark against the endless white, half-buried near the base of a rock outcropping that had blocked some of the wind. Emma's heart slammed against her ribs and she forced her frozen legs into a run. Haley. The shape didn't move. Emma dropped to her knees beside her hands trembling as she brushed snow away from Haley's face. The girl's lips had gone a pale, terrifying shade of blue. Her breathing was shallow, slow, dangerously slow. The kind of slow that Emma's father had once explained to her happened right before a body simply gave up. Haley, hey, stay with me. Emma shook her gently, then harder when there was no response. Come on, don't do this. Don't you dare do this. Haley's eyelids fluttered, barely a flicker of consciousness surfacing for just a moment. Cold, she whispered the word barely more than breath. So cold. I know I've got you now. Okay, I'm not leaving you. Emma's mind raced through everything her father had ever taught her about survival. Every winter spent hunting elk in weather nearly this brutal, every lesson about hypothermia and shelter, and the brutal mathematics of staying alive in a Montana storm. She knew with a clarity that terrified her that carrying Haley back to camp was impossible. The girl was too weak to walk, too heavy to carry more than a few hundred feet in these conditions, and the camp was over a mile behind her now. A mile she'd have to retrace through a storm that had only gotten worse. If they tried to move, they would both die on the mountain. Okay, Emma said out loud, mostly to herself, forcing her voice into something steady, even as panic clawed at the inside of her chest. Okay, we're not walking back. We're building something. Right here, right now. She looked around, mind cataloging everything within reach, the way her grandfather had taught her. An old rock formation that blocked wind on one side, low-hanging pine branches, heavy with snow. Dead wood scattered beneath the trees. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't close to ideal. But it was something, and something was infinitely better than nothing. Haley, I need you to try and stay awake for me, okay? Can you do that? Haley's eyes opened halfway, unfocused, fighting to hold onto consciousness. Who are you? Emma, from the bus. We talked about drawing, remember? A faint, broken, almost smile. Farm girl. Yeah, farm girl. And farm girls know how to survive a Montana winter, so you're going to have to trust me for the next little while, okay? Emma got to work immediately, hands screaming in protest as she snapped dead branches and dragged them toward the rock face, building a low lean-to structure, the way her father had shown her 100 times during hunting trips, packing snow along the outside for insulation, layering pine boughs across the top and sides to block as much wind as possible. Every movement cost her energy. She couldn't afford to lose every minute, stretched it into an eternity of biting cold and shaking hands. But she didn't stop, because stopping meant Haley didn't survive the night. Almost there, Emma muttered through chattering teeth, dragging the last heavy branch into place. Almost there, just hold on. She pulled the thermal blanket from her pack, the one item she'd packed almost as an afterthought that morning, and unfolded it with trembling fingers, the material barely bigger than a bedsheet, but engineered to reflect body heat back inward. Come here, she said, pulling Haley gently into the shelter's small interior, wrapping the blanket around both of them, pressing their bodies close together because shared warmth was the only heat source they had. Body heat, It's not much, but it's something. Haley's teeth chattered violently against Emma's shoulder. Why, why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Because nobody else was going to. The words hung in the frozen air between them, heavier than either of them expected. My dad, Haley whispered, panic edging into her weakening voice. He's gonna lose it. He's gonna think he's gonna find you alive, Emma said firmly, cutting off the spiral before it could take hold. That's what's gonna happen. You hear me? You're gonna see him again. So stay awake, Choni. Talk to me. Tell me about him. For a moment, Haley said nothing, her breathing shallow against the howling wind outside their fragile shelter. Everybody's scared of him, she finally whispered. Did you know that whole town crosses the street when he walks by? I've heard people talk, Emma admitted. He built me a treehouse when I was 8. A weak, broken laugh escaped Haley's blue lips. Took him 3 weekends. My mom had just died and he did not know what else to do, so he just built things. Kept his hands busy so he wouldn't fall apart in front of me. Emma's chest tightened. Your mom passed. Car accident. Icy road like this one probably feels like right now. Haley's voice cracked. I was 6. I don't remember much. But I remember him crying in the garage at night when he thought I was asleep. Big, scary biker president crying over an old motorcycle that used to be hers. He sounds like he loves you a lot. He's terrified of losing me. That's why he's so intense about everything. The rules, the check-ins, all of it. It's not because he doesn't trust me. It's because losing my mom broke something in him he never fixed, and I'm the only piece of her he's got left. Emma held her tighter, sharing what little warmth remained between them, feeling something shift in her chest, a recognition, a kinship between two girls who had spent their entire lives being defined by circumstances neither of them chose. A biker's daughter, a farm girl nobody noticed. 2 different kinds of invisible colliding in the middle of a blizzard that didn't care about either of their stories. My mom died too, Emma said quietly. 4 years ago, cancer. Took everything we had trying to save her, and she still... Her voice broke off. She still went, and my dad's been trying to keep our farm from the bank ever since, and I just kept working because somebody had to. Is that why you came out here, after me? Because nobody came for your mom? The question landed like a physical blow, and Emma sat with it for a long moment, snow hissing against the shelter walls outside. Maybe, she admitted finally, or maybe I just couldn't stand in that tent and do nothing while a person needed help. My dad always says the world doesn't remember who was careful. It remembers who showed up. Haley's eyes had begun drifting closed again, her body trembling, less now, which Emma knew from every survival lesson her father had ever taught her was not a good sign. Trembling meant the body was still fighting. When trembling stopped, it meant the body was starting to give up. Hey, no, stay with me. Emma shook her again harder this time, real fear cracking through her voice. Talk to me. Tell me something else. Tell me about your treehouse. It had a rope ladder, Haley mumbled, eyes fluttering. He painted it purple because that was my favorite color. Still is. What else? He'd climb up there sometimes after long rides. Just sit with me. Never said much, just sat there. Emma kept her talking, kept pulling stories out of her, one fragile sentence at a time, fighting a battle against hypothermia with nothing but willpower and words, while the storm screamed outside their shelter, like something determined to tear it apart. Meanwhile, far below, headlights cut through the storm in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Grizz drove at the front of a convoy that had assembled faster than any official rescue operation could have managed. 9 trucks strong, chains wrapped around tires, plows mounted on the front of 3 vehicles to carve a path through drifts that would have stopped an ordinary car cold. Behind him, a line of Hell's Angels members followed with a discipline that belied their reputation. Men who had ridden through hell for each other more times than anyone could count, now riding for something that mattered infinitely more than club business. Prez County's got roadblocks up ahead. Tank's voice crackled through the CB radio. They're not going to let us through. They can try and stop us, Grizz growled, both hands locked white-knuckled on the wheel as the truck fought against wind gusts that rocked the entire vehicle. I'd like to see them explain to a judge why they let bureaucracy get in the way of finding a missing 17-year-old girl. Sure enough, red and blue lights flickered through the whiteout ahead, a sheriff's cruiser blocking the mountain road with 2 deputies standing beside it, hands raised. Grizz rolled his window down despite the brutal cold slicing into the cab. "Road's closed," the deputy shouted over the wind. "County order, nobody goes up." "My daughter is somewhere on that mountain," Grizz shouted back, voice raw with a desperation that cracked through even his most intimidating exterior. 17 years old, missing for over an hour. You gonna stand there and tell me to wait while she freezes to death?" The deputy hesitated, clearly caught between protocol and the very human fear in a father's eyes. "Sir, I understand, but the conditions are—" "I don't need you to understand," Grizz cut in. "I need you to move your car, or I swear to God I will drive around it." Behind him, 8 more headlights idled in the storm engines, rumbling with barely restrained urgency, a small army waiting on his word. "Deputy Marsh," the second officer said quietly, pulling his partner aside, voice low but audible, even over the wind. "That's the Blackfoot Ridge trip. I heard the call come in 20 minutes ago on the scanner. Search and rescue can't get a truck up there for another hour minimum. If we don't let them through—" The first deputy's jaw tightened. He looked back at Grizz, at the raw terror barely contained behind the man's eyes, and made a decision that would later earn him a commendation and a formal reprimand in the same week. "Follow the plow line exactly," he said, stepping aside. "You go off that path. You're dead, you understand me. I'm calling this in, and God help you if something happens to one of your men out there." "Copy that," Grizz said, already rolling the window back up. "Thank you." The convoy surged forward into the storm, 9 sets of headlights cutting weak, trembling tunnels through snow so thick it felt like driving through static. "Talk to me, Tank," Grizz called into the radio, jaw clenched so tight it ached. "How much further to the trailhead?" "Maybe 2 miles, Prez. Storm's not letting up, though. Visibility's getting worse. Then we go slower and we go smarter. Nobody dies tonight. Nobody." In the small shelter Emma had built with nothing but branches, snow, and raw determination, the temperature had continued dropping, and Haley's responses had grown slower further apart, each one costing more effort than the last. Haley, stay with me." No response. "Haley?" Emma shook her harder, real panic flooding through her now cold fear that had nothing to do with the storm outside. "Come on, don't you dare do this. Don't you dare give up on me now." Haley's eyes cracked open, barely unfocused and distant. "I'm tired, Emma. I know you are. But you don't get to sleep yet, okay? You sleep now, you don't wake up. You understand me, so you're going to keep talking to me, and you're going to keep your eyes open even if it's the hardest thing you've ever done. Why do you care so much?" Haley's voice was barely a whisper, now words slurring together. "You don't even know me." Emma held her tighter, pressing whatever warmth remained in her own exhausted body against the girl slipping away in her arms. "Because somebody should have cared about you a long time before tonight," Emma said fiercely, tears freezing on her cheeks almost as fast as they fell. "Because you're not just some biker's daughter people whisper about on a school bus. You're a person. You draw horses, and you miss your mom, and your dad built you a purple treehouse, and none of that stopped mattering just because people decided to be scared of your last name." Something in Haley's expression shifted, some flicker of life sparking behind eyes that had begun to glaze over. "Nobody's ever said that to me before," she whispered. "Well, I'm saying it now, so stay awake and let me say more of it, because I'm not done yet." Outside, the wind howled with a fury that seemed almost personal, snow piling against the shelter's fragile walls, threatening to collapse the structure entirely under its accumulating weight. Emma glanced up at the branches groaning above them and felt a fresh wave of terror. The shelter wouldn't hold much longer. "Haley, listen to me. I need you to try and stand for just a second, okay? The roof's not gonna—" The words died in Emma's throat as a massive gust tore through the mountainside, and with a sound like breaking bones, one entire section of the lean-to's roof collapsed inward, snow and branches crashing down just inches from where Haley's head had been resting seconds before. "Haley!" Emma screamed, throwing herself over the girl's body to shield her from the worst of the falling debris, pain exploding across her back as branches struck her instead. For a terrifying moment, everything went white and silent, the world reduced to cold, an impact, and the roar of her own heartbeat. Then through the chaos, a sound cut through the storm that made Emma's blood run cold with an entirely different kind of fear. Engines, distant, faint, but unmistakably real. "Do you hear that?" Emma gasped, scrambling up out of the wreckage of the collapsed shelter, dragging Haley with her, ignoring the pain screaming through her own battered body. "Haley, do you hear that?" Haley's eyes fluttered open again, weaker than before, but there. Engines. Yes, yes, someone's coming. But even as hope surged through Emma's chest, a fresh terror gripped her just as tightly. The engine sounds seemed to be coming from the wrong direction entirely, not from the trailhead where the school group had set up camp, but from somewhere further up the mountain and deeper into terrain even more dangerous than where they currently stood. And the shelter that had barely been keeping them alive was now half-collapsed snow, pouring in through the broken roof, the temperature inside plummeting to match the brutal cold outside. They had no shelter. They had a girl who could barely stay conscious. And somewhere out there in the storm, unknown, vehicles were approaching from a direction that made absolutely no sense. Emma's hands shook as she pulled Haley as close as possible, using her own body to block what wind she could, scanning the white chaos around them for any sign of light, any hint of what was coming toward them through the blizzard. "Stay with me," she whispered more to herself now than to Haley, whose eyes had drifted closed again, despite every effort. "Just a little longer. Please, just a little longer." The engine sounds grew louder, and then without warning, they stopped completely. Silence swallowed the mountain again, broken only by the wind, and Emma's heart sank into her stomach with a dread so absolute it felt like drowning. Whoever or whatever had been coming toward them had just gone quiet, and Emma had no way of knowing if that meant rescue was closer than ever, or if the mountain had just claimed another vehicle full of people who would never make it to them at all. The silence stretched on, and Emma felt it pressing against her chest like a physical weight. "Come on," she whispered, straining her ears against the wind. Come on, don't be gone." Then a crack of static, distant but real, followed by a voice carried strangely on the wind, muffled, broken apart by distance and snow, but unmistakably human. "Ridge, anyone? Hello?" Emma's heart slammed against her ribs. She scrambled to her feet, dragging Haley up with her as gently as she could manage the girl's body limp and unresponsive against her side. "Here!" Emma screamed with everything she had left in her lungs. "We're here, over here!" Her voice broke apart against the storm, swallowed almost instantly by the howling wind, and for a horrifying moment she thought no one had heard her at all. Then the engine sound returned closer this time, followed by another and another, a whole chorus of motors grinding up through drifts that should have stopped any normal vehicle cold. "Hello!" Emma screamed again, waving one arm wildly. Even though she knew somewhere in the logical part of her mind that no one could possibly see her through this whiteout. "Please, we're here." A beam of light cut through the snow, weak and trembling, first then stronger, sweeping across the white chaos like a blade searching for something to cut through. Emma nearly collapsed with relief at the sight of it. "Over here!" she screamed one more time, voice cracking with exhaustion and cold. "Over here!" The light swung toward her voice and held. Figures emerged from the storm like something out of a dream. Emma wasn't sure she believed in yet. Huge men in heavy winter gear, leather visible beneath thick jackets, moving with a purpose and urgency that cut through the chaos like they'd trained for exactly this moment their whole lives. "I found them!" one of the men bellowed into a radio, clipped to his shoulder voice, booming even over the wind. "Tank, I found them! Tell Grizz!" The name hit Emma like a physical jolt. Grizz, Haley's father. He'd actually come. He'd actually torn through a closed mountain road in a blizzard to find his daughter exactly the way Haley had said he would if he ever found out she was in danger. "She's hypothermic," Emma gasped as the men reached them, her voice raw and shaking. "Bad. She's been out here for hours. I built a shelter, but it collapsed. I don't know how much longer she—" "We got you," one of the men said, kneeling immediately, checking Haley's pulse with hands that moved with surprising gentleness for someone built like a mountain himself. His name patch read Tank, stitched beneath a Hell's Angels emblem, visible through his open jacket. And despite everything Emma had ever heard whispered about men like him in Cedar Hollow, all she felt in that moment was overwhelming, desperate gratitude. "Pulse is weak, but it's there. We need to move now." "Where's Grizz?" Emma asked, helping lift Haley as gently as possible while Tank radioed coordinates back through the storm. "On his way, he split off toward the North Ridge. When we lost radio contact, he's gonna—" The radio crackled again, and this time Grizz's voice came through raw with a fear that no reputation, no leather vest, no intimidating presence could disguise. "Tank, tell me you found her. Tell me right now." Tank stretched the radio to his mouth, voice thick with emotion he clearly wasn't used to showing. "Found her, Prez. She's alive, hypothermic, but alive. Some kid built her a shelter, probably saved her life doing it. We're bringing her down now." There was a pause on the line so long, and Emma wondered if the connection had dropped entirely. Then, barely audible, cracked with something that sounded dangerously close to a sob. "Thank God, thank God, thank God. I'm coming to you. Don't move. I'm coming right now." The men worked with brutal efficiency, wrapping Haley in emergency thermal blankets, pulled from packs that looked far more professional than anything Emma had carried, lifting her carefully between two of them to begin the trek back toward the trucks. Emma stumbled alongside them, her own body finally beginning to register the full extent of what she'd put it through: hours in sub-zero temperatures, exhaustion clawing at every muscle, hands that had gone from painful to frighteningly numb. "Hey!" A hand caught her elbow, steadying her as her knees buckled slightly. She looked up into the face of an older biker with a gray beard and eyes that held none of the menace she'd expected from stories told in town. His vest read "Preacher." "You doing okay there? You've been out here a long time, too." "I'm fine," Emma lied, though the tremor in her own voice betrayed her. "You're not fine, but you're alive, and that's what matters right now. Come on, we'll get you warmed up, too." They half-carried, half-guided her down through the drifts, following a path the plow trucks had already begun carving, back toward the trailhead, snow still falling, but the worst of the wind beginning finally to ease. Emma kept glancing back at Haley's still form wrapped tight between two massive bikers, praying silently that they'd reached her in time. The trucks appeared through the snow like a fortress of steel and headlights, engines rumbling, doors thrown open, men shouting instructions to each other with the kind of coordinated urgency that spoke of experience Emma hadn't expected from a motorcycle club. They loaded Haley into the back seat of the lead truck, wrapping her further, someone producing a portable heater that roared to life almost instantly. And then through the snow, another set of headlights appeared, moving faster than any of the others, swerving slightly before the driver corrected and slammed to a stop just feet away. The door flew open before the engine had even fully died. Grizz Walker moved across the snow like a man possessed, every ounce of the intimidating presence Emma had heard whispered about in town completely stripped away, replaced by nothing but raw, desperate terror. "Haley, Haley." He reached the truck and pulled his daughter into his arms, with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man his size, cradling her head against his chest, his whole body shaking. "Baby girl, can you hear me, Haley? It's Dad. I'm here. I'm right here." For a long, agonizing moment, there was no response, and Emma watched Grizz's face crumble with a fear so raw it made her own chest ache. Then faintly, Haley's eyes fluttered open. "Dad." The sound that came out of Grizz Walker wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a laugh. It was something in between, something torn from the deepest part of him, relief so total it broke through every wall he'd built over 4 years of grief and fear. "I'm here, baby. I'm here. You're safe now. You're safe. I've got you." "It's so cold, Dad." I know. We're gonna get you warm right now. Just hold on just a little longer. You did so good. You're so brave. I've got you." He climbed into the truck beside her, still holding her against his chest, barking orders to the men outside without ever loosening his grip. "Get us to the hospital now. Someone drive, go." The truck lurched into motion, engine roaring against the storm. And for a moment, Emma simply stood there in the snow, watching the taillights disappear, feeling the adrenaline that had carried her through the last several hours finally begin to drain away, leaving nothing behind but bone-deep exhaustion and cold that had settled into her marrow. "Hey," she turned to find Preacher watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You should be in that truck too, kid. You're hypothermic yourself, probably worse than you realize." "I'm okay," Emma said again, though her voice wavered and her vision had begun to blur slightly at the edges. "You're not okay, you're just too stubborn to admit it." He steered her firmly toward another truck. "Get in. We'll get you warmed up and get you checked out. Nobody walks away from something like that without paying some kind of price." Emma didn't have the strength left to argue. She let herself be guided into the truck, and the moment the door closed behind her, sealing out the wind, something in her chest finally cracked open, and the tears she'd been holding back through hours of terror and cold came pouring out all at once, her whole body shaking with the release of everything she'd been forcing herself not to feel while Haley's life had depended on her staying calm. "Easy," Preacher said, gently wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Easy, you did good. You did real good out there." I didn't know if she was going to make it, Emma whispered, voice breaking. The shelter collapsed and she stopped talking, and I didn't know if... But she did, Preacher said firmly. She made it because you didn't give up on her. That matters more than you know. The convoy began its careful crawl back down the mountain plow trucks leading the way, and Emma sat wrapped in blankets, shivering, exhausted, and unable to stop replaying every terrifying moment of the last several hours in her mind. She thought about the collapsed shelter, the silence after the engines had stopped, the horrible uncertainty of not knowing if help was coming or if the mountain had claimed more victims instead of fewer. She thought about Haley's blue lips, her slurring words, the way her eyes had drifted closed despite every effort to keep her talking. And she thought about Grizz Walker's face when he'd pulled his daughter into his arms, a man the entire town feared reduced in an instant to nothing but a father terrified of losing everything he had left. At Cedar Hollow Regional Hospital, chaos had already erupted by the time the convoy arrived, doctors and nurses rushing out to meet them with gurneys and warming equipment, having been alerted by radio during the drive down. Haley was rushed through the doors first, Grizz refusing to release her hand, even as they wheeled her toward the emergency wing, his voice a constant, desperate stream of reassurance. You're gonna be fine, baby. You're gonna be just fine. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Emma was brought in shortly after, and though her condition was far less severe than Haley's, the doctors insisted on a full examination, wrapping her in warming blankets and running IV fluids to stabilize her core temperature. She sat on the edge of a hospital bed, still shaking slightly, staring at nothing when the door opened and her father burst through it, face white with terror. Emma! Walter Carter crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled his daughter into his arms with a force that nearly knocked the air out of her. Oh God, Emma, they called me. They said you'd gone out into the storm. I thought... His voice broke entirely, and for the first time in years, Emma watched her father cry. I'm okay, Dad. I'm okay. You could have died out there. Do you understand that you could have died? I know, Emma whispered, tears filling her own eyes again. But there was a girl out there who needed help, and nobody else was going to go, and I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. Walter pulled back, holding his daughter's face in both hands, studying her with an expression caught somewhere between terror and overwhelming pride. That's your mother in you, he said, finally, voice thick. She never could stand by and watch somebody suffer either. Drove me half crazy sometimes, but it's who she was, and I guess it's who you are too. Down the hall in a private room reserved for critical patients, Haley's condition had stabilized enough for doctors to allow visitors, though her core temperature was still recovering, and she remained wrapped in warming blankets with monitors tracking her vitals. Grizz sat in a chair beside her bed, refusing to leave, despite nurses' gentle suggestions that he get some rest himself, his hand wrapped around his daughter's the entire time, as if letting go might somehow undo the miracle of her survival. You scared me half to death, he murmured, watching her sleep, exhaustion and relief warring across his weathered features. Haley's eyes cracked open slowly. Dad, right here, baby, right here. The girl, Haley whispered, struggling to focus. Emma, is she okay? Did they find her too? She's fine. Down the hall, actually being checked out herself. Grizz's jaw tightened, something complicated moving behind his eyes. She's the reason you're alive. You know, Tank told me what she did. Built you a shelter out of nothing in the middle of a blizzard, kept you talking, kept you conscious. If she hadn't gone after you... His voice broke off, entirely unable to finish the sentence, unable to voice the alternative he'd been imagining every single second since Reyes's phone call. She said something to me, Haley murmured, eyes drifting closed again, despite her efforts to stay awake. In the shelter. Said nobody should be left out there alone. Said I mattered even though everyone in town just sees your vest and gets scared. Grizz's throat tightened. She's right, he said quietly. You matter more than anything in this world. And I owe that girl a debt I don't know how I'm ever gonna repay. You could start, Haley mumbled, sleep finally beginning to pull her under, by not being scary when you meet her properly. Despite everything, despite hours of terror and cold, and the closest brush with losing everything that mattered to him, Grizz felt a genuine laugh escape his chest, rough and rusty from disuse. I'll work on it, he promised, watching his daughter finally drift into real healing sleep. I'll work on it. He sat there for a long while after she'd fallen asleep, simply watching her breathe, memorizing the rise and fall of her chest like he needed physical proof that she was still there, Still alive, still his. The adrenaline that had carried him through the drive up the mountain had faded now, leaving behind something heavier, a bone-deep recognition of how close he'd come to losing the only piece of his wife he had left in this world. Eventually, he rose from the chair, careful not to wake her, and made his way down the hospital corridor toward the room where he'd been told the other girl was resting. He needed to see her, needed to look into the eyes of the person who had walked into a blizzard, for a stranger who had risked everything with absolutely nothing to gain, who had done what an entire tent full of trained adults had been too afraid to do. He found the room and paused outside the door, hearing voices through the gap, a father and daughter quiet and exhausted, the kind of ordinary conversation that happens in hospital rooms after a crisis has passed. "You should have told me you were planning something like this," Walter was saying, though there was no real anger in it anymore, just lingering fear working its way out of his system. "Your grandfather's compass, your mother's blanket, you had this all planned before you even knew what you were walking into." "I didn't plan anything, Dad. I just knew somebody had to go, and I was the only one who would." Grizz knocked softly on the doorframe. Both Carters looked up, and Emma's breath caught slightly at the sight of him. This man she'd only ever heard about in whispered fearful rumors around town, now standing in a hospital doorway looking somehow smaller than his reputation. Exhaustion and raw emotion written across every line of his face. "Mr. Carter," Grizz said, extending a hand toward Walter, who took it after only the briefest hesitation. "I don't think we formally met. Grayson Walker. Everyone calls me Grizz." "Walter Carter." A pause, then quieter. "Thank you for coming for our girls tonight." Grizz's eyes moved to Emma, and something in his expression shifted entirely, the intimidating presence falling away, completely replaced by something raw and grateful and almost reverent. "Emma." Her name came out rough, thick, with emotion he clearly wasn't used to expressing. "I don't even know where to start." "You don't have to say anything," Emma said quickly, suddenly self-conscious under the weight of his gratitude. "I just did what anybody would have done." "No," Grizz said firmly, stepping further into the room. "No, you didn't. An entire tent full of adults stood there and did nothing while my daughter froze to death on that mountain. You were the only one who walked out into that storm. You built her a shelter with your bare hands. You kept her talking, kept her fighting, kept her alive when everything in that situation should have killed her." His voice cracked slightly. "That's not what anybody would have done. That's not even close to what anybody would have done." Emma didn't know how to respond, so she said nothing, watching this legendary feared man struggle visibly with emotions too large for words. "She told me what you said to her," Grizz continued, voice softening further. "About mattering. About not being just some biker's daughter people whisper about." He shook his head slowly. "You have no idea what that meant to her. What it means to me, hearing that someone finally saw her the way I've always seen her." "She's a good person," Emma said simply. "She talked about you, in the shelter, about the tree house you built her, about how you cried in the garage when you thought she was asleep." She watched something break open behind Grizz's eyes at those words. "She loves you a lot, Mr. Walker, even when she rolls her eyes at your rules." Grizz laughed, rough and wet, wiping at his eyes with the back of one heavily tattooed hand. "Yeah, that sounds like her." He was quiet for a moment, gathering himself. "Look, I don't know how to properly thank someone for saving my daughter's life. There's no gift, no gesture, nothing that could ever really cover what you did tonight. But I want you to know that from this moment forward, you and your family have people looking out for you. Real people. People who show up when it matters, same as you did for Haley." Walter shifted slightly beside Emma, clearly uncertain how to respond to an offer this significant from a man whose reputation preceded him through every corner of Cedar Hollow. "That's kind of you," Walter said carefully, "but you don't owe us anything." "With respect, Mr. Carter, I disagree completely." Grizz's voice carried a weight and certainty that left no room for argument. "In my world, when someone saves your family, that debt doesn't just disappear because you say it does. It becomes a bond. And I don't break bonds like that, not ever." Before either Carter could respond, a nurse appeared in the doorway, addressing Emma directly. "Miss Carter, your vitals have stabilized nicely, but we'd like to keep you overnight for observation just to be safe, given the duration of exposure." Emma nodded, still processing everything that had happened, In the span of just a few hours, walking into a blizzard, finding a dying girl building a shelter from nothing, watching a legendary and feared man break down with gratitude in a hospital doorway. I should let you rest, Grizz said, moving toward the door, then pausing. Emma, for what it's worth, thank you. Truly, you didn't just save my daughter's life tonight. You gave her something nobody's given her in a long time. You saw her. He left the room, and Emma sat back against her pillows, utterly drained. Her father settling into the chair beside her bed with the exhausted relief of a parent who'd nearly lost everything and was still trying to process getting it back. Get some rest, Walter murmured, taking her hand. You've earned it tonight, sweetheart. Emma closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. Her mind still replaying the storm, the collapsed shelter. Haley's fading voice, the terrifying silence after the engines had stopped. She thought about what Grizz had said, that debts like this didn't simply disappear, that they became bonds instead, and wondered, drifting toward exhausted sleep, what exactly that meant for the future. Neither she nor Haley could yet see coming. Down the hall, Grizz returned to his daughter's bedside, settling back into the chair he refused to leave, watching her sleep peacefully for the first time since the nightmare had begun. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from Tank, checking in on the club's behalf, wanting to know if there was anything else needed. Grizz typed back a simple response. She's alive. She's safe. That's everything. But even as relief settled deep into his bones, another thought had already begun forming, one that wouldn't leave him alone as he sat in the quiet hospital room watching his daughter breathe. The storm that night hadn't just brought his daughter back to him. It had brought an entirely different kind of family into their lives, one built not from blood or club patches, but from a single impossible act of courage. From a girl the whole town had spent 20 years overlooking. And Grizz Walker, a man who had spent 4 years building walls to protect himself from ever feeling this kind of vulnerability again, found himself wondering if maybe those walls had just been cracked open by a farm girl in worn boots who hadn't asked for anything in return. He had no idea yet how deeply their two families were about to become intertwined, nor how far he was willing to go to make sure Emma Carter and her father never had to fight their battles alone again. But sitting there in the quiet hum of hospital machinery, watching his daughter's chest rise and fall with steady, healthy breath, Grizz Walker made himself a silent promise. Whatever it took, however long it took, he was going to make sure the world finally saw what he now saw so clearly. That courage didn't wear a uniform, and it certainly didn't care about last names or leather vests or the size of somebody's bank account. Sometimes courage looked exactly like a 20-year-old farm girl who refused to let a storm decide who lived and who didn't. The days that followed the storm blurred together for Emma in a strange, disorienting rhythm. Hospital discharge, a slow drive home along roads still lined with plowed snow, her father's hands gripping the wheel a little tighter than usual, glancing over at her every few minutes as if checking she was still really there. Cedar Hollow, a town that had spent 20 years barely noticing Emma Carter existed, suddenly couldn't stop talking about her. Did you hear what she did? Walked right into that blizzard, by herself. I always said there was something different about that girl. Emma heard the whispers differently now than she used to. Where once they'd stung with dismissal, now they carried a strange new weight she didn't quite know how to hold. She wasn't used to being seen. She wasn't sure she liked it. You don't have to listen to any of it, Walter told her over breakfast 3 days after they'd come home, sliding a plate of eggs across the table. People talk. Doesn't change who you are. I know, Dad. Emma pushed the eggs around her plate, appetite still not fully returned. It's just weird. Everybody's suddenly acting like they always believed in me. Selective memory's a powerful thing. Walter's voice carried a dry edge, though his eyes were warm. Eat your breakfast. You've still got chores. That at least hadn't changed. The cows didn't care that their owner had become something of a local legend overnight. The fences didn't fix themselves just because a newspaper reporter from Bozeman had called the house twice already asking for an interview. Emma had turned the reporter down both times. I don't want to be some story, she told her father after the second call. I just want things to go back to normal. But normal, it turned out, wasn't waiting for her to catch up. The knock on the Carter farmhouse door came on a gray Thursday afternoon 4 days after the rescue, while Emma was out repairing a section of fence the winter storm had knocked loose. She heard the truck pull up the gravel drive. Before she saw it, a sound too smooth and too expensive to belong to any of their neighbors. A man in a pressed wool coat stepped out, clutching a leather folder against his chest, Like a shield, his shoes clearly unprepared for the mud and slush covering the yard. "Mr. Carter," he called toward the house. "Daniel Whitfield from Cedar Hollow Trust Bank. I have some paperwork we need to discuss." Emma's stomach dropped straight through the frozen ground beneath her boots. Walter emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, his expression shifting the moment he recognized the bank's logo stitched onto the man's coat pocket. "We're not behind," Walter said immediately, tension coiling into his voice. "I made the January payment. I've got the receipt." "This isn't about a missed payment, Mr. Carter. It's about the loan structure itself." Whitfield opened his folder, pulling out a document with practiced efficiency, the kind of gesture that suggested he'd delivered bad news to 100 desperate families before this one. "Your loan was restructured 18 months ago under a balloon payment agreement. That payment comes due in 60 days. The full remaining balance, $41,000, needs to be paid in full, or the bank will be forced to begin foreclosure proceedings." The words landed like a physical blow. Emma set down the fence post she'd been holding, walking closer, her whole body suddenly cold in a way that had nothing to do with the winter air. 60 days. Walter's voice cracked. "We don't have $41,000. You know we don't have that kind of money." "I understand this is difficult news, Mr. Carter. The bank is required to notify you formally, which is what this visit accomplishes. If you're unable to secure the balance or refinance elsewhere, the property will proceed to auction." Whitfield held out the document, his expression carefully professionally neutral. "I truly am sorry." "Sorry doesn't keep a roof over anybody's head," Walter said, voice shaking now. Decades of quiet dignity cracking under the weight of a threat he'd been fighting off for years. "This land's been in my family for 3 generations. My father worked this ground. His father before him. I understand the sentimental value, Mr. Carter, but the bank operates on financial terms, not family history." Whitfield's tone remained polite, detached, the tone of a man delivering devastating news for the 100th time that year. "You have 60 days. I'd recommend speaking with a financial advisor about your options." He climbed back into his truck without another word and pulled away down the gravel drive, leaving Walter standing frozen in the mud, the document trembling in his weathered hands. "Dad!" Emma's voice came out small, terrified in a way the blizzard hadn't managed to make her feel. "Dad, what does this mean?" Walter didn't answer right away. He just stared down at the paper, at numbers that might as well have been written in a foreign language, for all the sense they made against the reality of their bank account. "It means," he finally said, voice hollow, "that everything your mother and I borrowed, everything my father built before us, might not survive the spring." That night, Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her childhood bedroom, mind spinning through every possibility, every option, finding nothing but dead ends at every turn. $41,000. They didn't have $4,000, let alone 41. Selling livestock wouldn't come close. A second mortgage was laughable when the first one had already crushed them this badly. She thought about the mountain, about walking into that blizzard without a second thought, and felt a bitter, exhausted irony settle into her chest. She'd been brave enough to face down a storm that could have killed her. But this, numbers on a page, a system designed to grind families like hers into nothing, this felt like an enemy she had no idea how to fight. 3 days later, while Emma was in town picking up feed supplies, she ran into Haley outside the general store. The girl, looking healthier than she had, in the hospital color returned to her cheeks, though something anxious flickered behind her eyes when she spotted Emma. "Hey," Haley crossed the street quickly, pulling Emma into an unexpected hug. "I've been wanting to see you. Dad said you'd want space to recover, but I kept telling him I needed to actually thank you properly, not just through some hospital doorway." "You don't have to thank me," Emma said, managing a small smile despite the weight sitting on her chest. "I'm just glad you're okay." Haley studied her for a moment, teenage intuition picking up on something Emma hadn't intended to reveal. "You don't look okay, though. What's wrong?" Emma hesitated, then found herself explaining the bank notice. The 60-day deadline, the impossible number that stood between her family and losing everything they'd ever known. She hadn't meant to unload it on a girl she'd known for less than a week, but something about Haley's genuine concern made the words spill out before she could stop them. Haley's expression darkened with an intensity that surprised Emma. "You're telling me the bank wants to take your family's farm, weeks after you nearly died, saving my life?" "It's not connected, Haley. It's just bad timing." "It's not bad timing, it's wrong," Haley said fiercely. You didn't hesitate for 1 second to walk into a blizzard for a stranger, and now some bank wants to punish you for it by taking away everything your family has. She pulled out her phone. My dad needs to know about this. Haley, no. I don't want charity. I don't want your dad to feel like he owes us. He does owe you, Haley cut in, already typing. He told me himself the debt doesn't just disappear. And this isn't charity, Emma. This is what family does for each other. Emma opened her mouth to protest further, but Haley was already walking away, phone pressed to her ear, voice fading as she moved down the sidewalk. Dad, you're not going to believe what just happened to Emma's family. That evening, as Emma sat at the kitchen table helping her father sort through bills that had suddenly become terrifying documents, instead of routine paperwork, headlights swept across the farmhouse windows. Now who's coming out here this time of night? Walter muttered, rising from his chair with tired suspicion. Emma looked out the window and felt her stomach twist. A familiar truck, followed by several more, rolling slowly up their gravel drive, engines rumbling in the darkness like something out of the storm all over again. Grizz Walker climbed out of the lead truck, several club members following behind him, their presence filling the small farmyard with an energy that felt both intimidating and strangely protective. Mr. Walker. Walter opened the front door, confusion and wariness mixing across his features. Is everything all right? Is Haley? Haley's fine, Grizz said, climbing the porch steps with a folder tucked under one arm that looked eerily similar to the one Whitfield had carried days earlier. I'm here about the notice you got from Cedar Hollow Trust. Walter's jaw tightened. That's a private family matter, Mr. Walker. I appreciate everything you've done, everything you said at the hospital, but I can't accept. I'm not asking you to accept anything yet. Grizz interrupted, though not unkindly. I'm asking you to listen. Can we come in? It's cold out here, and this isn't a conversation for a doorway. Walter hesitated, pride warring visibly with exhaustion before finally stepping aside. Just you, he said. The rest of your men can wait if they need to. Fair enough. Grizz turned to the group behind him. Give us a few minutes. Inside the kitchen, Grizz set the folder on the table, pulling out a chair without waiting for invitation, his massive frame looking almost comically large in the modest farmhouse kitchen. I made some calls this afternoon, he said, pulling documents from the folder. Turns out I know some people. Turns out some of those people know things about Cedar Hollow Trust that the bank probably doesn't want getting out. Mr. Walker, I don't need... Your loan, Grizz continued undeterred, was restructured into a balloon payment 18 months ago. You remember signing that paperwork? Walter's brow furrowed. I remember signing something. Times were hard, my wife was sick. I wasn't exactly reading every line as carefully as I should have. That's exactly what I figured. Grizz slid a document across the table. Because the way this restructuring was pushed through, the disclosure requirements weren't properly met. Predatory lending practices aimed at exactly the kind of situation you were in, vulnerable, desperate, not in a position to fight back. I had a lawyer friend look at this today. He thinks there's a strong case that this restructuring is legally challengeable. Emma, standing in the kitchen doorway, felt something shift in the air, hope flickering weakly against weeks of dread. Even if that's true, Walter said slowly, lawyers cost money we don't have either, which is why I'm covering the legal fees, Grizz said simply, as though this were the most obvious solution in the world. And if the challenge doesn't work, if for some reason the loan structure holds up, then I'm covering the balloon payment directly. Walter's face went pale. Mr. Walker, that's $41,000. I can't let you. You can and you will, because you're not going to sit there and lecture me about debts and obligations when your daughter walked into a blizzard and pulled my little girl back from the edge of dying. Grizz's voice hardened, though his eyes remained kind. I told you at the hospital this wasn't charity. I meant it. This is what happens when someone saves your family. You show up for theirs. This is too much, Walter whispered, voice thick. This is your money. It's nothing compared to what you gave me, Grizz cut in, voice cracking slightly for the first time. You think I care about $41,000 I would have paid every dollar I own and then some to have my daughter walking around alive today. Your girl gave me that for free at the risk of her own life. So don't you dare sit there and tell me this is too much. Silence settled over the kitchen, heavy with an emotion none of them quite knew how to voice. Dad, Emma said quietly, finally stepping fully into the room. Let him help, please. This isn't about pride anymore. This is about keeping the farm. Walter looked between his daughter and the man who just over a week ago he'd only known through frightened rumors passed around town. Something in his expression finally softened decades of stubborn self-reliance, giving way beneath the weight of what was actually at stake. "Okay," he said finally, voice rough. "Okay, thank you." Grizz nodded once sharp and final, the kind of gesture that closed a matter permanently in his world. "I'll have my lawyer contact you tomorrow. We're going to fight this the right way first. If it doesn't work, the payment's covered regardless. Either way, you're not losing this farm." As Grizz rose to leave, he paused at the door, looking back at Emma with an expression that carried something deeper than simple gratitude. "You know," he said, "in my world, we don't measure people by how much money they have or what kind of last name they carry. We measure them by what they do when everything's on the line. Your daughter proved exactly who she is on that mountain. Now I'm just proving I'm someone who honors that." He left, and the sound of engines faded slowly down the gravel drive, leaving the farmhouse quiet and strangely lighter than it had felt in years. But peace, Emma would soon learn, rarely lasted long in a town like Cedar Hollow. Word of Grizz Walker's involvement in the Carter family's financial troubles spread through town within days, and not everyone received the news the way Emma had hoped. "Heard the Hells Angels are buying out half the Carter farm," someone muttered at the feed store, just loud enough for Emma to hear as she loaded bags into her truck. "Wonder what strings come attached to money like that." "Probably laundering something through it," another voice added. "Bikers don't just give away 40 grand out of the goodness of their hearts." Emma's hands tightened around the feed bag, old instincts urging her to stay quiet, to let the whispers pass like they always had. But something had shifted in her since the mountain, some new resolve she hadn't fully recognized in herself until this moment. "They're not laundering anything," she said, turning to face the two men directly, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "They're helping a family that almost lost everything because a predatory loan nearly destroyed us after my mother's medical bills. If you've got a problem with that, maybe ask yourself why nobody in this town offered to help before the Hells Angels did." The men fell silent, clearly not expecting pushback from the quiet farm girl they'd spent years overlooking. Emma didn't wait for a response. She loaded the rest of her supplies and drove home, chest pounding, surprised at her own boldness, but not regretting a single word. The real trouble, however, arrived a week later in a form none of them had anticipated. Emma was helping her father repair the barn roof when a car pulled up the drive, not a truck, not a familiar neighbor's vehicle, but a sleek sedan with local news station logos painted across the doors. A woman climbed out, microphone already in hand, a cameraman trailing behind her. "Emma Carter," the reporter called out, striding across the yard with practiced confidence. "Diane Foster, Channel 7 News. I was hoping to get your reaction to some concerning allegations that have surfaced regarding the rescue operation on Blackfoot Ridge." Emma exchanged a wary glance with her father before climbing down from the barn ladder. "Allegations? What allegations?" "Sources within the county sheriff's department have raised questions about the legality of the Hells Angels rescue convoy bypassing an official road closure during the storm." Diane continued, microphone extended expectantly. "Some are calling it reckless endangerment, suggesting the club prioritized their own agenda over official safety protocols. There are also questions being raised about whether this financial assistance to your family constitutes some form of undue influence, given your daughter's role in the rescue." Emma felt anger flare hot and sudden in her chest. "Are you serious right now? Those men saved Haley Walker's life. If they'd waited for official protocols, she would have died on that mountain. So you're confirming the club did bypass an active road closure?" "I'm confirming they did what needed to be done when the system failed," Emma shot back, voice rising with a fierceness she didn't fully recognize in herself. "The county said wait. Grizz Walker and his club said no. And because they said no, a 17-year-old girl is alive today instead of dead in a blizzard because everyone else was too afraid to break a rule. And the financial assistance to your family. Some are calling it a payoff to keep you quiet about." "A payoff for what?" Walter interjected sharply, stepping protectively beside his daughter. "For nearly losing our farm to a predatory loan the bank pushed on us when my wife was dying. You want to talk about who's actually taking advantage of desperate families around here? Maybe point that camera at Cedar Hollow Trust instead." Diane Foster's expression flickered with something like genuine surprise at the intensity of the pushback, clearly having expected an easier story than the one unfolding in front of her. I appreciate you sharing your perspective, she said, finally signaling her cameraman to lower the equipment. I think there's clearly more nuance here than the initial report suggested. After the news van pulled away, Emma stood in the yard breathing hard, adrenaline still coursing through her system. You okay? Walter asked quietly. I don't know, Emma admitted. I can't believe people are trying to twist this into something ugly. Those men saved a girl's life. My family's getting help because Grizz genuinely cares, not because of some conspiracy. People fear what they don't understand, Walter said. Always have. Doesn't make it right, but it makes it predictable. That night, the story aired anyway, though not in the form the reporter had originally framed it. Emma's impassioned defense had apparently struck enough of a chord that the segment shifted focus, entirely becoming less about scandal and more about a genuine act of heroism being questioned by bureaucratic caution and small-town suspicion. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media picked up clips of Emma's fierce defense within hours, the video spreading far beyond Cedar Hollow's borders, comments flooding in from strangers moved by the story of a farm girl who'd walked into a blizzard for someone she barely knew, and a motorcycle club that had torn through closed roads to bring a daughter home alive. By the following morning, Grizz called the Carter farmhouse directly. You saw the response, he asked when Walter put the call on speaker. We saw it, Walter confirmed. Didn't expect anything like this. Neither did I. Grizz admitted, something like disbelief coloring his usually gruff voice. Emma, you didn't have to defend us like that. That reporter could have twisted your words just as easily against you. She was trying to make it sound like something ugly when it wasn't, Emma said simply. I wasn't going to let that happen. Not after everything your club did for Haley, for my family. There was a pause on the line, heavy with something unspoken. You know, Grizz finally said, Haley's been asking about you nonstop. Wants to know if you'd come out to the clubhouse sometime. Meet everyone properly, not just the guys who happened to find you on that mountain. Emma glanced at her father, who nodded slightly, silent permission in the gesture. I'd like that, Emma said. Good, because there's something else I wanted to ask you about too. Something that's been sitting with me since the hospital. Grizz's voice took on a different quality, more serious, more deliberate. The club does a lot of charity work throughout the year, toy drives, veteran support, that kind of thing. But I've been thinking, after everything that happened, that maybe it's time we did something specifically for families like yours. Families who work themselves into the ground trying to hold on to what's theirs, who fall through every crack the system creates. What are you saying? Walter asked. I'm saying I want to start something. A fund maybe, or some kind of support network. Something that makes sure no family in this county has to face what almost happened to you alone. And I want Emma's story to be part of how we explain why it matters. Emma felt something warm bloom in her chest, something that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with purpose. I'd be honored, she said quietly. Good, Grizz said, satisfaction evident in his voice. Because this town's about to learn that the people they've been afraid of for years are the same people willing to fight hardest for families like yours. And that farm girl they used to overlook, she's about to become the reason a whole lot of things change around here. After the call ended, Emma sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing, processing the strange, dizzying shift her life had taken in just a few short weeks. From invisible farm girl to the names spreading across social media. From facing foreclosure to watching a feared motorcycle club fight to save her family's legacy. From a stranger on a school bus to someone whose fate had become permanently entwined with the Walker family's future. But even as hope settled into her chest for the first time in years, a small, cautious part of her mind refused to fully relax, because 2 days later, another car pulled up the Carter farmhouse drive. Not a news van this time, but a plain black sedan Emma didn't recognize at all, carrying a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself simply as representing certain concerned parties within Cedar Hollow Trust Bank's parent company. And the conversation that followed would reveal that the fight to save her family's farm was far from over, because someone somewhere had decided that Emma Carter's sudden fame and Grizz Walker's very public involvement in her family's affairs had become a problem that needed to be handled very differently than a simple foreclosure notice ever could. The man in the expensive suit introduced himself as Richard Ashford, and from the moment he stepped out of that black sedan, Emma understood instinctively that whatever he'd come to say wasn't going to be simple. Mr. Carter, Miss Carter. He nodded to each of them in turn, his smile polished and utterly without warmth. I represent Meridian Financial Group, the parent company overseeing Cedar Hollow Trust's regional portfolio. I wonder if we might have a few minutes of your time. We already have legal representation handling our loan situation, Walter said carefully, standing protectively near Emma. Anything you need to discuss should probably go through them. This isn't about the loan exactly. Ashford's smile widened, though it still failed to reach his eyes. It's about the rather significant amount of media attention your family has attracted recently. Attention that's put Meridian in an uncomfortable position. I don't see how that's our problem, Emma said, arms crossing. Let me be direct then. Ashford pulled a folder from his briefcase, though this one, unlike Grizz's, felt like a weapon rather than a lifeline. The predatory lending allegations your attorney has raised are frankly going to be difficult for us to fight in a courtroom, given the current public sympathy toward your family. Meridian has decided it would be far simpler and far less costly to simply settle. Walter's brow furrowed with cautious suspicion. Settle how? We're prepared to forgive the balloon payment entirely. Full loan forgiveness, farm deed clear, no further obligation. Ashford's tone carried the practiced ease of someone who had delivered similarly generous-sounding offers many times before, always with strings attached that revealed themselves later. In exchange, we'd need a signed statement from your family retracting any public claims of predatory practices, along with an agreement that Mr. Walker's charitable fund does not use your family's story or his club's name in connection with any future publicity regarding lending practices in this region. The room went silent for a long moment. You want us to lie? Emma said slowly, understanding dawning cold and sharp in her chest. You want us to say the bank did nothing wrong in exchange for wiping out the debt they created illegally in the first place? I wouldn't characterize it as lying, Ashford said smoothly. I'd characterize it as a mutually beneficial resolution that allows everyone to move forward. And if we say no, Ashford's smile finally faltered just slightly, revealing something harder underneath the polished exterior. Then Meridian proceeds with full legal defense of the original loan structure, which I should mention, our legal team is significantly better resourced to sustain than a small-town attorney working pro bono for a motorcycle club. Litigation like this can take years, Miss Carter. Years during which the balloon payment obligation remains active and interest continues to accrue. That's extortion, Walter said, voice hardening. That's business, Ashford corrected calmly. I'd encourage you to discuss this offer with your family before responding. I'll be in touch within the week. He left the same way he'd arrived, unhurried and untouched by the fury he'd left behind him, climbing back into his sedan and disappearing down the gravel drive. Emma turned to her father, hands shaking with anger. They want us to protect them. After everything they did to us, to families like us, they want us to help them keep doing it to somebody else. I know, Walter said grimly. I know exactly what they're asking. We can't sign that. Even if it means losing the farm, we can't just let them keep hurting people the way they hurt us. Walter looked at his daughter for a long moment, something fierce and proud moving behind his tired eyes. No, he agreed quietly. We can't. That evening, Emma called Grizz, directly relaying every detail of Ashford's visit, the settlement, offer, the thinly veiled threat wrapped inside corporate politeness. She expected anger. What she got instead was something colder, more calculated. They're scared, Grizz said after she'd finished, his voice carrying a satisfaction that surprised her. A bank that big doesn't offer full loan forgiveness because they're feeling generous, Emma. They're doing it because they know exactly how bad this looks in court, and they're trying to buy your silence before this turns into something much bigger than one family's foreclosure notice. So what do? We don't sign anything, Grizz said firmly, and we don't back down. Give me a day. I've got an idea, and I think you're going to like it. The idea, it turned out, involved considerably more than Emma had anticipated. 2 days later, Grizz called an emergency meeting at the Carter farmhouse, and Emma watched with growing astonishment as trucks began filling the gravel drive once again. Not just Grizz and a handful of club members this time, but nearly 24 bikers, along with a woman Emma didn't recognize, carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of sharp professional suit that suggested she meant business. This is Marcus Bell, Grizz said, introducing a solidly built man near the front of the group. And this is Sandra Whitmore, consumer protection attorney out of Helena. Sandra's agreed to take your case pro bono on one condition. What condition? Walter asked warily. That we make this loud, Sandra said, stepping forward with a confident, determined energy that immediately put Emma at ease. Meridian's counting on this staying quiet, staying local, staying small enough that they can pressure it into disappearing. We're not going to let that happen. I've already been in contact with 3 other families in this county who face nearly identical loan restructuring tactics from Cedar Hollow Trust. This isn't an isolated incident, Mr. Carter. It's a pattern. And patterns make for much stronger cases. Emma felt something powerful stirring in her chest, a sense of purpose sharpening into focus. 3 other families, at least 3 we've confirmed, Sandra said. Probably more we haven't found yet. Predatory balloon payment, restructuring, aimed specifically at families going through medical crises. Farm families with land as collateral, people too exhausted and desperate to read fine print carefully. It's a deliberate strategy, and your case with the public attention it's already generated is exactly the leverage we need to expose the whole thing. What do you need from us? Emma asked. Courage, Sandra said simply, because Meridian's gonna come back harder once they realize you're not taking the settlement. They're gonna dig into your family's history, your finances, anything they can use to discredit you. This won't be easy. Emma glanced at her father, who nodded slowly, resolve settling into his weathered features. We didn't survive a blizzard just to fold now, Walter said. Whatever it takes. The following weeks moved faster than Emma could have imagined, the quiet rhythm of farm life colliding head-on with a legal battle that had begun expanding well beyond Cedar Hollow's borders. Sandra's investigation uncovered 5 more families with nearly identical loan restructuring stories, each one adding weight and credibility to a case that Meridian could no longer dismiss as an isolated dispute. Ashford returned once more, this time with a considerably less friendly demeanor, attempting to negotiate a larger settlement that would cover all affected families in exchange for silence. Sandra rejected it without hesitation. My clients aren't interested in buying your silence about your own predatory practices. They're interested in making sure this never happens to another family in this county again. The case went public in a way none of them had fully anticipated, picked up first by regional news outlets, then by a national consumer protection segment that framed Emma's story. The farm girl who'd walked into a blizzard only to discover her family was fighting an entirely different kind of storm back home. It's emblematic of exactly the kind of predatory lending crisis affecting rural families across the country. Emma found herself somewhat reluctantly becoming a face for something far larger than she'd ever intended. She agreed to a single television interview, sitting nervously across from a national correspondent, Haley seated just off camera for moral support, Grizz standing protectively nearby. You've been through an extraordinary amount in a very short time, the correspondent said gently. A life-threatening rescue, and now a fight to save your family's farm from what your attorney is calling predatory lending. What's kept you going through all of it? Emma thought about the question for a long moment before answering, her father's voice echoing somewhere in the back of her mind. I think, she said finally, the world doesn't remember who was careful. It remembers who showed up. My mom used to say that, and I guess somewhere along the way I decided I wasn't going to be the kind of person who just watches bad things happen to good people. Not on a mountain and not in a bank office either. The interview aired to overwhelming response, sympathy, and outrage pouring in from across the country, pressure mounting on Meridian Financial Group in ways that made their earlier confidence crumble rapidly. 3 weeks after the segment aired, Sandra called with news that made the entire Carter farmhouse erupt into disbelieving relief. They're settling, Sandra said, voice bright with victory. Full loan forgiveness for your family and all 5 other affected families, plus a substantial fund established for consumer education and legal support for future cases. They're also agreeing to independent oversight of their lending practices in this region for the next 5 years. Walter sat down hard at the kitchen table, hand pressed against his chest, as though physically absorbing the weight of relief flooding through him. It's really over. It's really over, Sandra confirmed. Your farm is safe, Mr. Carter, completely, permanently safe. Emma felt tears she hadn't realized she'd been holding back finally spill over to relief and exhaustion, and disbelief tangling together into something she didn't quite have words for. 4 years of watching her father struggle beneath a debt that threatened everything they'd built, and now finally it was over. That evening, the Walker family arrived at the Carter farmhouse for what had quietly become a tradition over the past several weeks. Dinner together, 2 families from entirely different worlds finding unexpected comfort in each other's company. Haley helped Emma set the table while their fathers sat on the porch, voices low and easy. The wariness that had once defined Cedar Hollow's perception of Griswalker, long since replaced by genuine friendship between two men who'd both nearly lost everything that mattered most to them. "Can you believe it's been 3 months?" Haley asked, setting down the last plate. "Feels like a lifetime ago and yesterday both at once." "I know exactly what you mean." Emma glanced out the window at their fathers laughing at something together on the porch, an image that would have seemed impossible back when this whole story began. "Never thought I'd see the day your dad and mine would be sitting around swapping stories like old friends." "Never thought I'd have a sister," Haley said quietly, the word landing softly but with obvious weight behind it. "Because that's basically what you are, now you know. Not just the girl who saved my life, my sister." Emma felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Yeah, I feel the same way." Dinner that night carried the warm, easy rhythm of a family gathering, rather than two separate households. Stories and laughter flowing freely across the table, Grizz recounting exaggerated tales of Walter's stubbornness during the legal battle, while Walter fired back with equally exaggerated stories about Grizz's overprotective parenting. "You should have seen him," Walter said, gesturing dramatically with his fork. "Man showed up here with an entire convoy of bikers because his daughter had a school field trip. I thought we were being invaded." "My daughter's safety isn't a joke," Grizz said, though he was laughing as he said it, an ease in his voice that would have seemed impossible to imagine back when Cedar Hollow still whispered his name with fear. "Neither's my farm," Walter shot back, "and you tore up half the county road system trying to save it." The two men dissolved into genuine laughter, the kind that comes only from people who've weathered something significant together and emerged closer for it. Later, as the evening wound down and dishes were cleared, Grizz pulled Emma aside on the porch, his expression turning more serious, more deliberate. "I wanted to tell you something," he said, "before it becomes official next week." "What's that?" "The fund we started back after everything happened with the bank. We've been getting calls, Emma. Families all over the state hearing about what happened here, reaching out for help with their own situations. Predatory loans, medical debt farms on the edge of foreclosure. It's grown a lot bigger than either of us expected." "That's incredible," Emma said, genuinely moved. "We want to name it after your mother," Grizz continued, watching her carefully for a reaction. "The Carter Family Foundation for rural families facing exactly the kind of crisis yours did. Sandra's already drawing up the paperwork. But I wanted your blessing first and your father's before we made it official." Emma felt tears rising again, thinking of her mother, of the woman who'd taught her that showing up mattered more than being careful, who'd never lived to see her daughter walk into a blizzard or fight a bank or become somehow impossibly a symbol of exactly the courage she'd always tried to instill in her. "She would have loved that," Emma whispered. "She would have loved all of this. You, Haley, this whole ridiculous, wonderful family we somehow built out of a snowstorm." Grizz pulled her into a hug, brief but genuine, the kind of gesture that would have seemed impossible from the feared, intimidating man Cedar Hollow had once whispered about in fearful tones. "Family doesn't happen by blood alone," he said quietly. "Sometimes it happens because two people refuse to let each other fall. You proved that on that mountain, Emma, and we've all just been catching up ever since." Spring arrived in Cedar Hollow with a gentleness that felt almost deliberate after the brutal winter that had tested every family involved in this story. The Carter farm, safe now from foreclosure, began to flourish under renewed hope and quietly under the steady support of a community that had finally learned to see Emma and her father clearly, instead of dismissing them as simply struggling and unremarkable. The Hells Angels, once feared throughout the region, had become something entirely different in the eyes of Cedar Hollow, not because their reputation for loyalty and toughness had changed, but because the town had finally witnessed exactly where that loyalty and toughness pointed when it mattered most. Grizz's charitable fund expanded rapidly, providing legal support and financial relief to families across 3 counties, each case a testament to the same lesson Emma had learned on that mountain months earlier, that showing up for someone fully and without hesitation could change everything. Haley, no longer defined solely by whispered rumors about her father's leather vest, had found her own quiet confidence blossoming alongside Emma's friendship, filling sketchbooks with drawings that increasingly featured mountains and horses, and more than anything else, images of 2 girls who'd found sisterhood in the middle of a blizzard neither of them had expected to survive. On a warm afternoon in late April, Emma stood at the edge of her family's property, watching Haley ride Dusty across the newly green pasture, laughter carrying clear and unguarded across the open field. Walter worked nearby repairing fence posts with a lightness in his movements that hadn't existed in years, finally free from the crushing weight of debt that had shadowed their family since her mother's illness. Griz's truck rolled up the drive as it did most weekends, now bringing not intimidation or fear, the way it once might have, but simple welcome familiarity. "Beautiful day," Grizz said, joining Emma at the fence line, watching his daughter ride with an ease in his own posture that spoke volumes about how far he'd traveled since that terrifying night on the mountain. "It really is," Emma agreed. They stood together in comfortable silence for a while, watching Haley and Dusty move across the pasture, watching Walter work steadily on fences that would hold for generations now, instead of crumbling under financial strain. "You know," Grizz said eventually, "I think about that night a lot, how close I came to losing everything that mattered, and how it was you of all people who refused to let that happen." "I just did what felt right," Emma said simply. "Anyone would have—" "No," Grizz interrupted gently but firmly, the same correction he had offered once before in a hospital doorway months earlier. "Not anyone would have. You did because that's who you are. And because of that, an entire community learned something important about what real courage looks like. It's not about money or reputation or how tough somebody appears from the outside. It's about what a person does when everything's on the line, when nobody's watching, when it would be so much easier to stay silent and safe." Emma watched Haley's laughter drift across the pasture, watched her father's steady, hopeful work along the fence line, watched the golden light of a Montana spring settle over the land that had nearly slipped away forever, and felt something solid and permanent take root inside her chest. "A person's worth was never about where they came from," she said quietly, more to herself than to Grizz, though he nodded in complete agreement. "It's about what they choose to do when somebody needs them." Years later, people in Cedar Hollow would still tell the story of the night a blizzard nearly stole a biker's daughter from the mountain, and how a farm girl nobody had ever truly noticed became the reason she came home alive. They would tell it as a story about courage, about the walls people build around fear and reputation, about the unexpected families that form when two people refuse to let each other fall. But for Emma Carter and Haley Walker, it was never really a story at all. It was simply the truth of who they'd become. Sisters bound not by blood, but by a single unshakable choice made in the middle of an impossible storm, proving once and for all that the most extraordinary courage in the world often comes wearing nothing more remarkable than a worn farm jacket, walking straight into the heart of the unknown, because somebody somewhere needed her to come home.